right, hi everyone, and welcome to the IBD Awareness Town Hall. World IBD Day takes place on May 19th every year to unite people worldwide in the fight against Crohn's and colitis, also known as inflammatory bowel diseases or IBD. This year, Hollister Incorporated joins forces with organizations from over 50 countries on 5 continents to engage in education and awareness about these digestive diseases. I will now hand it over to our moderator, Karen Spencer, to begin today's discussion.
Did you know that there's 10 million people around the world who have been diagnosed and are living every day with inflammatory bowel disease? Here alone in the United States, 1.6 million people are living with inflammatory bowel disease. And that's about 780,000 people with Crohn's disease and 970,000 people with ulcerative colitis. And those statistics are just as staggering in Canada. In Canada, there's 129,000 people living with Crohn's disease and 104,000 people living with ulcerative colitis. And when we talk about ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, we're talking about inflammatory bowel diseases. And each of you have all received a card that actually talks about IBD Day and slightly compares the differences between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So just quickly, the differences are Crohn's disease is a disease that actually impacts the entire digestive system, right from our mouth to our anus. And it attacks the entire bowel wall, where ulcerative colitis affects only the large bowel, and it impacts only the inner lining of the digestive wall. Both diseases are inflammatory bowel diseases, and both impact patients in different ways, but impact them every day. And we're going to hear about that with our panelists today. I have a couple of facts, though, as we look forward with people living with inflammatory bowel disease. Here in the United States, Crohn's disease is on the rise. In Canada, Canada has the highest prevalence of Crohn's disease all over the world. Amazing statistics. But with statistics like these, and people who are affected by IBD Day or IBD, I thoroughly welcome you to Inflammatory Bowel Disease Day. And thank you for joining us to bring awareness and to unite people to understand living with a digestive disease and how we can move forward to make sure that we potentially find the cure for that disease, but more importantly, to allow people to live a better quality of life having had or living with inflammatory bowel disease. So today, I'm Karen Spencer. I'm the Director of Global Clinical Education here at Hollister, and it is an honor to be on the stage today with our 4 guests and to be able to talk about inflammatory bowel disease and bring some awareness to others about it as well. Each of our panelists have had a journey of living with inflammatory bowel disease, and they are all here today to share with us their story and their journey, but more importantly, about bringing awareness to that global community. So I would like to introduce our panel today. We have Robin Brown. Robin is from Belfair, Washington, and she is the reigning Mrs. Mason County, Washington. And we have Danielle Gulden and Joe Teeters from Columbus, Ohio. Now this is a dynamic duo, and they have a social media website called Baggin, and you're going to hear all about that. And finally, we have Krista Du Veau. Krista is from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She's a kindergarten teacher, and she brings a fresh perspective and a positive attitude with her social media site called My Gut Instinct. So we'd like to welcome our panelists today. And although most people who live with inflammatory bowel disease don't have surgery, as a matter of fact, the statistics are about 67% of the people with Crohn's disease will have surgery, and only about 27% with ulcerative colitis will have surgery. Some people will have surgery and end up with an ostomy. Our panelists today have had surgery and they have had ostomy as part of their plan and their management of their inflammatory bowel diseases. Because living with inflammatory bowel disease is truly a burden. It is a burden on quality of life. It's a burden on being able to go back to work. It's a burden on having a relationship, medical costs, and as well travel. But our panel here is here today to tell us their stories. So we're going to start with just getting to know each of our panel members. So I'm going to start with you, Robin, if that's okay. If you could just give me a summary of your journey with inflammatory bowel disease and what brings you here today.
You bet. So my journey started when I was fairly young. I always had tummy troubles, or a stress tummy, as my grandma would call it. And I dealt with that for a lot of my youth. And then when I was 21, I ended up getting septic salmonella and had a bowel resection. And at that time they said, oh, you have this salmonella going on, but did you also know that you actually have a disease? And I said, oh, well, I knew I was different, and so we started trying to treat my condition and managing my symptoms. I had multiple surgeries after that over the course of 10 years, and then unfortunately I was involved in an accident where I was crushed between our off-road truck and the back wall of our garage. And when that happened, obviously that had a tremendous impact on my gut health and really just complicated things further. So last year in February is when I got my ostomy, and that's where I'm at now. So 1 year and doing better than ever.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. One of the hashtags for inflammatory bowel disease is hashtag making the invisible visible. And I find this very interesting, and as I've gotten to know our panel members a little bit, Danielle, you were misdiagnosed for many, many years. So can you share your story about the misdiagnosis and how you've come along to living with an ostomy and managing your IBD?
Absolutely. So I started getting sick in high school, which is a really, really fun time to start getting ill. And so around when I was 17, I started having all kinds of issues. Somehow I got ignored. I went to college, came back home, and I was diagnosed with a gluten intolerance, which, back in 1994, 95, we didn't have all of the big grocery chains that had all of the specialty foods. So I spent a lot of money eating a lot of things that I couldn't and shouldn't have. And it took until 1999 I was properly diagnosed with ulcerative colitis through a colonoscopy. And it was kind of a great day because I had the real answer of what I had wrong, and knowing that going forward I could manage it through treatments and medications. So I lived with ulcerative colitis. It was very, very severe. My colitis, I don't know how I got through my wedding day. I don't know how I got through college. I had to drop out of classes because there wasn't a bathroom on the floor that I needed. This is a very interesting life. So finally, and another fun fact, I actually installed a toilet in my car. That's how sick I was, because I was going to the bathroom 20 to 25 times a day. So I went to a car dealership, and they're like, do you want a sunroof? And I'm like, no, I want to take out a car seat to put a toilet in. And I made little curtains, and that's how I lived my life because I couldn't drive around. So my daughter was born into thinking that everybody had a potty in their car, which was, she thought that was pretty cool. But was very confused when she went into other people's cars. Right. So in 2007, I decided to have my ostomy surgery after every medication that I went through, every treatment wasn't working, and I was very, very ill. So it was a very easy decision to make, and the greatest decision I've made.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. And as you can hear, just listening to the story of actually putting a toilet into your car, the disease impacts your everyday lives and how you cope with that. So thank you for sharing those personal.
I had the poop mobile.
I wish I would have thought of that.
And as we talked about, a lot of people do have surgery and do have ostomy surgery with inflammatory bowel disease. But for a very long time, they're managed with medications, usually high doses of steroids, Remicade. So Joe, if you don't mind sharing your story of how you were managed with medications for a long time and how you finally made that decision to have ostomy surgery to manage your IBD.
Sure, absolutely. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at the age of 19. I went for a little bit of time with not getting properly diagnosed. It took about a year before they figured it out. And at that time, in 1993, the biologics hadn't hit the market yet, so the main course of action was to go on high-dose steroids, sulfa drugs, and other drugs. Those, of course, worked, knocked the inflammation down, but they really didn't protect the intestines from damage. So I had my first intestinal resection in 1995. Felt great, came back, felt normal, felt healthy again, had solid poop again. That was a great thing. But the disease was still prevalent, still very active, came back full force. In 1998, Remicade hit the market. It was the first biologic to hit the market. I started on that, and it worked very well for me. But it didn't cure me, it didn't put me into remission, so I had to have another resection in 2004. Again, felt great for a while, went back on changed my medical regimen a little bit. But by 2012, the disease was still ravaging my intestines, and I had really bad rectal disease at that point. The rest of my intestines was pretty okay, but I had really bad rectal disease. And after having Crohn's for so long and the disease was so bad, I was at very high risk of colorectal cancer. So that, coupled with the effects it was having on my body, with the consultation of my surgeon and my GI, I made the decision to have my ostomy surgery.
Thank you for sharing your story. And one of the things that I really take home is listening to you is when you are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, it is a long journey. For Crohn's disease, it's a forever journey. And it's just interesting to hear everything that you've gone through with all the medications just to try and find the quality of life that you deserve. So thank you for sharing that with us. Most people are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease in their late adolescence, early adulthood. Unfortunately, we're seeing that age coming down, and we're seeing people being diagnosed at much younger ages. Krista was diagnosed at 9 years old. So Krista, would you share your story being diagnosed at such a young age, and then your long journey to where you've come to today?
Of course. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at the age of 9. My mother, was concerned. I was 8 years old. I was going to school, and when I'd come home from school, all I wanted to do was nap and not go play with my friends. And that was kind of a red flag. So she said, something's wrong. We went to the doctor. We went for blood work. They told me I simply just had low iron and sent me home with iron pills. And then we went to a specialist, and they diagnosed me almost right away with Crohn's disease. And instead of going on prednisone right away, because I was very underweight, very malnourished, I decided to have a feeding tube that they inserted in my nose all the way to my stomach. And I was fed that way for 4 years. So I was in grade 5, I think, so grade 5, 6, 7. But when I went to junior high, my mom would take the tube out in the morning so I could go to school with my friends and them not know, because junior high, they're not so nice always. And then my mom would put the tube back in at night for my feeds. But I was really lucky. My friends and the community, I'm from a small community, and they came together and they supported me. All my friends, they brought their dolls to school and they put yarn for a tube, just to kind of normalize it. And eventually the biologics came out, and I was also on Remicade when it was a study that worked really well for me. And then it just stopped working, and in high school I had my first bowel resection. After that, I tried different meds, but nothing really worked. Tried prednisone, all the biologics. I exceeded those and had my second bowel resection when I finished my university degree. And then 2 years ago, a year ago in April, I decided to get my ostomy surgery because I couldn't focus on my career, I couldn't go to work. I was getting married and I was just really worried. I suffered a lot with incontinence. So the last thing I wanted was to have my nice wedding dress and have an accident. So I pushed for the ostomy surgery and I haven't looked back since.
I think Krista's story probably pulled on all our heartstrings, because can you only imagine being 9, 10 years old in junior high and having a feeding tube and having bowel issues and just trying to fit in. And I think all our panelists here have had their journey. It's all a little bit different, but all of their lives have been impacted by living with inflammatory bowel disease. So again, we are very honored to have you all here today to share your stories, bring that global awareness to everyone who is watching as well.